Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Dan Gillmor. I'm going to introduce Julia Angwin, and want to mention, since we're getting started a little late due to the earlier speech by some political folks, we're going to extend the session a little longer, and it will go into the lunchtime, but you're not going to miss any other sessions as a result. It's an incredibly real honor for me to introduce Julia Angwin, whose work I got to know in about 1996, which for the people who do math is 23 years ago. And I was at the San Jose Mercury News in Silicon Valley. We thought ourselves as the daily newspaper of Silicon Valley. Did a lot of technology coverage. I was a columnist. We didn't think much of the coverage of technology at the San Francisco Chronicle, which was 40 or so miles up the freeway. And then one day this byline shows up in the Chronicle, Julia's. And we start reading her stuff, and we look at each other and say, wow, they finally got somebody who knows something about technology to cover technology. This is amazing. And if you understand her career, you're understanding that this is someone who not just understands it, but understands why it matters, what it does, and what it's doing to all of us beyond the simple and easy things that we think about. And her new startup, the Markup, she'll tell you about that. I think it's an audacious and wonderful new idea in journalism. And it basically comes from the notion, when you're looking at technology, you have to do the math, and you have to understand how this works. And she does, and it's going to be an amazing thing to watch, and I can't wait to see it. Julia Angwin.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you, Dan, for that kind introduction. When I was at the San Francisco Chronicle, I was, of course, reading all your stuff and thinking, oh man, those guys really have it together. And I'm just trying over here to bring things to light. So I'm a longtime technology journalist. I grew up in Silicon Valley. I learned to program in 5th grade. I thought I would go into the technology business, but I ended up falling in love with journalism. And so I want to talk today a little bit about where I think we are in journalism right now and what we can do to bring ourselves to the next level in terms of how we can integrate technological expertise into our newsrooms. And I know a lot of you are already doing that in all sorts of ways. So I want to apologize in advance if this sounds like obvious, but I feel like it's important to say things that are obvious because sometimes we don't say them. So I'm going to start with, so basically my talk is witness versus forensics. And essentially what I mean by that is that journalism has been traditionally driven by the concept that we are the witness to events. We are the eyes of the public. We go places that the public can't go, and we see what's happening there and report back. And that has been the tradition of journalism for a very long time. We're in a weird situation right now where the public is also very much able to witness and publish in many situations. You may remember this event. This was a big deal in California where some police sprayed enormous amounts of pepper spray into the eyes of student protesters. And I don't know if you can see in that, but every single person is filming. The police are filming their actions, all the bystanders are filming, and so there's enormous amounts of witness that is happening out there. And this is a great thing. This has changed journalism, this has changed the world, right? Because we have all been forced to acknowledge that there were things that we chose not to witness before. We chose not to witness sexual harassment. We chose not to witness pervasive racism, right? And that has changed because the public now has a voice. So this is a good thing, but it also means we as journalists need to evolve. It also means, by the way, that anyone being able to publish anything means we have decentralized the creation of propaganda. And so anyone can make all sorts of fake news. You probably remember this was one that was sort of a very important piece of fake news during the US presidential election, where this one outlet had said that the Pope endorsed Trump. Lots of people believed that. And so what do we do with ourselves in a world where the public is witnessing, public is also creating fake news? How do we change our roles? And what I would say, my argument is that we have two tasks that we need to increase our focus on. One is what I would call forensics. Looking at the information that is out there, that public is putting out there as witness, and verifying if it's true. And many times that's a technical task. Looking at the metadata in an image, trying to figure out if a photo has been doctored or if a video is a deep fake. These are the kinds of tasks that journalists are now increasingly being asked to do. Similarly, we also need to go and witness things that the public can't see, places where nobody can bring a camera. And one of those places is inside what we call the black box, right? The automation, the algorithms that are driving so many more of the decisions that our governments and institutions are making, right? Imagine if somebody had the ability as a journalist to go in and audit that 737 MAX software before it plunged 2 airplanes into the ocean. Right now, the only people who get to see that software are the federal regulators. And because the government was shut down, they didn't look at it. So we don't have independent oversight over those types of automation that we have in other parts of our life, where journalists can go to a public meeting and hold a public official accountable. But right now, there's not a great mechanism for journalists to look inside much of the software that makes important decisions in our life. And so I feel that journalists need to step up for these two tasks. And like Dan said, that means doing math. That means using computer scientists in the newsroom. And I call this approach that we need to use the scientific method, right? This is something that has been done in science forever, which is you approach a problem with a question. You have a hypothesis. The hypothesis is, for instance, is this software that the airplane is using going to plunge people to their death in the ocean? That would be a question. And then you would test that and see whether it would happen or not. And so what you do with this method is you figure out how much data would I need to figure out a plausible answer to this question, and then does my data support some sort of conclusion? And I think this is a better model than the one we used to call objectivity. So objectivity is basically this idea that there's two sides to everything, right? And this has led us to all sorts of false equivalence, where there's a story about climate change and it says there's one person says yes and one person says no, despite the fact that the preponderance of the evidence suggests yes. And so objectivity, I think many of us have already decided, is a false god. And yet at the same time, we haven't come up with a great idea of what our next god should be. And so I humbly suggest science as a model. And I'm not saying that we are going to be scientists, right? We are not going to have the same rigor. We are not going to be having peer review in many cases, but we can move the ball forward. Journalism still is the first draft of history. Why shouldn't we be the first draft of science too? And so I think, and this is an idea that I really didn't come up with. This is actually from 1973. This guy, Philip Meyer, wrote a book called Precision Journalism, in which he argued that journalists need to become scientists. They need to become database managers, data analysts, and bring all of those skills to journalism. And he is at the University of North Carolina. He's an emeritus professor. And he really is the guiding light for my work. Everyone who joins my new startup gets a copy of his book. We all have it on our desk. And It's one of those ideas whose time has come. He was probably too early. There weren't so many people who took to his views, but I think the moment is now. Sadly, though, the moment is not really there in most newsrooms. So this is what most newsrooms look like. There's a data desk that you go to as a service desk, as a journalist. So you're a journalist, you're running around, doing some reporting, a bunch of people tell you something. Then you go to the data desk and you say, all these people told me this thing. Can you find data to support this thing? And then the data desk says, well, there's not really any existing data for that. Or there is some data for that, but it doesn't support your hypothesis. And then there's a fight. And generally, the journalist wins. They write their story. They either write around the data or they just base it on their anecdotes. And this is not a great model. Sometimes it works, but in many times it leads to stories that don't tell the whole story. The way that I think it should be done is with the integration of data into the reporting process. If you think about what is journalism, journalism is simply collecting data. Every interview that we do with a person is a data collection. The only thing that a data journalist does is they just collect data at scale with automation. And so they're just collecting larger amounts of data. And so I think we should put that at the front end of the process. They should be at the very beginning when we formulate our hypothesis. One example is a story that I did with my team at ProPublica. We were worried, like many people were, after the presidential election in November of 2016 in the US. We thought, wow, it's so weird because we don't know what happened on Facebook. Apparently, Trump had bought all these ads and they really convinced people, but we don't know what they look like because literally there's no way to see what ad was sent to who on Facebook. So we built a tool to collect ads off of Facebook. We actually asked our readers to install a little bit of software on their computer, and when they went on Facebook, it looked through their news feed and identified which ads were political and sent them to a public repository that we put together. So we built basically the first public repository of political ads on Facebook. And our goal was to figure out what were politicians saying. Were they lying? Were they spreading misinformation? But what was interesting about this was what we actually found was a much bigger story. Among all those ads, we found that actually all of the nation's top employers were posting ads for jobs. And they put those job ads, they targeted only to people of certain ages, which is against the law in the US. The Age Discrimination Act prevents you from advertising a job only to people of certain ages. And so this was a classic example of an experiment. We were testing one hypothesis, we found something entirely different, and we reported out that thing. Just last week, Facebook said, after being sued by several people over this, that they would no longer allow job ads to be targeted by age. They also had been allowing racial discrimination, gender discrimination, all sorts of other types of discrimination for housing credit and employment ads, and they finally agreed after 2 years to shut down all of those abilities of targeting. So that was the kind of reporting that I think, what I like about using the scientific method is that you can precisely diagnose a problem and that allows you to solve it. And I feel like one of the most important things about the scientific approach is the idea that you have to collect your own data. The reason is that if there's not great data sets available out there, Facebook doesn't have a data set called places where we have allowed companies to discriminate by age. Like, that doesn't exist. And so in order to find out whether that was happening, we had to go and find out that information ourselves. And I think that's generally true. Most data desks are designed to analyze data, but not to collect original data. And I believe that we have to, as journalists, focus on original data collection. Our job is to bring new facts to the table. And the truth is that institutions of power that collect data, they don't have any incentive to spend money on data that's embarrassing to them. Classic example of that in the US is police. They do not collect information about how often they use force against citizens, or even oftentimes how often they shoot citizens. And so many journalists in the US have had to scramble to build databases to keep track of whether the police were abusing their power. And that's the kind of journalism we should be doing. Some of these are some of the stories that I've done with using original data collection. We used this to show that Facebook was allowing people to target ads to Jew haters, was a category that they offered advertisers. We looked at software used in criminal sentencing in the US to show that that software, which judges use to decide how much time to give somebody in incarceration, we looked at that software and showed that it was biased against black defendants. And then in one of my favorite stories, we took a boat outside of Mar-a-Lago, where Trump's winter home is, and from the boat we used some tools to scan the Wi-Fi and showed that any decent hacker could break into Mar-a-Lago's networks, which possibly the most fun we've ever had. So I would say original data collection, also if it involves boating, it's a great thing. And as I said, I feel like when you collect data and you approach it in a scientific way and you present your findings as what they are, meaning here's what we know, here's the amount of data we use to collect it, and here are the limitations. There are always limitations of findings, right? And it's a much better way to approach the work than just saying on the one hand, on the other hand. Two examples of where we were able to really diagnose an issue. We did a study of these criminal risk scores, and because we were able to look at 7,000 defendants' actual risk scores, we could show exactly what was wrong with the way they were predicting risk, and that has actually changed. Not in every situation, but in many states have asked people who make this software to change the way that they test for bias in their software. Similarly, we did a study of something that has been known for a long time in the US, which is if you have a car and you buy car insurance, in one neighborhood, if it's a white neighborhood, the rates are usually lower. And if you're in a majority minority neighborhood, the rates are usually higher. And people had said forever, that the insurance companies had said forever, well, this is based on the risk of accidents in those neighborhoods is higher. So we actually went and collected, we did public records requests in all 50 states in the US to find the true risk of accidents in those neighborhoods, and then we showed that actually those rates were not justified by risk. What was actually surprising was that it wasn't that the neighborhoods, the minority neighborhoods were being overpriced, it's that there was an unfair discount being offered in the majority white neighborhoods. And then California was able to fix that because that's a very precise diagnosis. And so the California regulators went and said to the top insurers, you have to change your algorithm. So after doing this type of work for 4 years at ProPublica, 14 years at the Wall Street Journal, I've left and starting a new company called the Markup. It's a nonprofit newsroom, and the goal is to really institutionalize this approach. Everyone there believes in testing a hypothesis. Half of our journalists are data journalists, half are journalists, traditional journalists, and they all work together on investigations. There's no data desk. Everyone is expected to come up with hypotheses, test them, find ways to investigate the most important questions of our time. And I'd be happy to talk more about it now with Dan.
For those of you who read Julia's bio in the IJF site, you know that she had 14 years at the Wall Street Journal, during which time she did path-breaking reporting on privacy and other technology issues, 2 books of major note, and then amazing work with a great team at ProPublica. Why did you leave these great journalism jobs and do this thing, which is, I don't think it's a risk, but it's certainly very different.
Well, it's definitely risky. Yeah, I think it is. I ask myself that a lot. Like, why did I leave the best job in journalism to do something really risky? And I think it's because, back when you and I were tech reporters in 1996, we were both on the business desk, and business journalism is really about holding companies to account on behalf of shareholders, right? The idea is really accountability to your shareholders. And I always expected that a field would emerge of tech accountability to the public. Just like in health reporting, right? There are health reporters who write about health risks to the public, and there are health reporters who write about the business side of health. And over the 20 years, I tried to do what I called tech accountability to the public reporting, but I didn't see that field emerge, not the way that I wanted it to. And so ultimately, I felt like if I don't try to build it myself, I'll just always be mad at myself for not having tried. I won't be mad if I fail. I'll be sad, but I will be mad if I don't try to do this.
It is a testament to journalism in general that what she's doing is needed, and she's right, this shouldn't be needed, but it is, and I'm really glad you're doing it. So, an obvious question here, why the name The Markup? I think half of the people in this room may know the answer, but I'll bet a lot of people don't, and it's not an obvious answer.
So we love the name The Markup because it's sort of two things. First and foremost, the markup refers to the language of the web, which is hypertext markup language, HTML. And so for techies like us, it's a little bit of a play on the language of technology. And then it's also a very traditional journalism, old school editing. Your editor would mark up your story with a red pen. And so we liked this idea of journalism and technology together.
In the work you've done, you've made quite liberal use of what people call crowdsourcing, inviting the former audience to be part of the journalism. How much of that will be going on in the new venture?
We plan to do quite a bit of that. I think one of the great things about using technology is that we can automate the process of crowdsourcing. So like we did with the Facebook political ad collector, we just built a little bit of software that actually had artificial intelligence in it that helped identify political ads, and then all that the people using it had to do was help us confirm whether our AI was correct. And so what that meant was we got better quality data. The people looking at their own news feeds didn't have to make some sort of human decision about whether I'm going to look through and find the political ad and screenshot it for you. And so we plan to do that quite a bit, because I think one thing I learned at ProPublica that was such a great lesson for me was how much our readers wanted to participate and wanted to help, and I'm hoping that'll be true at the Markup too.
The data that you collect and generate, are your plans to make it public in the end? How much of it will remain solely under your control, and how much will go out for other people to use?
Our default position is everything should be as public as possible. That said, we're also very privacy sensitive, and so sometimes when you collect data, it might be too revealing. Now, with the Facebook political ad collector, what we did was we actually stripped out any unique identifiers before they landed in our database. We actually built it to be compliant with the GDPR because we launched it in Germany first. And so we wanted to have as little personal data as possible. And so our best case scenario is we would do that. There may be situations where we end up collecting personal data, and then we would want to be really careful with that.
Maybe a look ahead at things you're likely to be doing. I'll ask that question in this form. What worries you the most right now about technology and how it affects society?
Oh, it's hard to choose, right? Like I wonder this all the time. Like, what am I most worried about with technology? And I think I'll have to go with sort of ubiquitous state surveillance the way that it's happening in Western China right now. So I don't know how many of you know, but there's a Muslim region in China where the government is very concerned about terrorism, and so they are monitoring everything. How many times you go to the gas station, how many times you go to the grocery store, like your interactions with other people. They have, networks of cameras. They have payment systems where everything is reported to them. And then they decide via an algorithm if you're likely to be a terrorist risk, and they put you in a re-education camp. Now that is exactly the dystopian scenario that I thought was maybe 15 years away and is actually happening now. And so it's terrifying. I don't know, everyone has different views about Edward Snowden, but when he said in that interview, when in the hotel room in Hong Kong, he said, after he had given over the files, he said, "I'm worried about turnkey totalitarianism." And I think that's a very good description of what we can face when this type of power is put into the hands of governments that want to repress their citizens.
Is the markup going to be focused exclusively or mostly on US-based topics, or are you thinking more globally on this?
Well, our mandate is to cover the impact of technology on society. And so I believe that those impacts are global. Many of the companies are US-based, not all. But we want to investigate globally. That said, we do not have the budget or the bandwidth to set up bureaus around the world, so we're going to have a partnership model. I really believe that it's important to have domain expertise. I don't believe that we in New York should sit and do some sort of computer analysis and then write about something that's happening in Mexico. If we see something interesting happening, we should find a partner there so we really understand the context. And so that's our plan, is to do a partnership model around the world.
You said limited resources. I think it's worth pointing out that you're launching with what most people in the nonprofit journalism world would call unlimited resources, in part thanks to Craig Newmark's amazingly generous grant.
Yes, we could not be more grateful to Craig Newmark. He gave us $20 million, and that is an incredible runway. It is an incredible runway. But if we set up international bureaus, it would last a little less long.
Okay. I think you must have a million questions for Julia. Why don't we get to you folks? And are there microphones?
How does this work?
Or there were yesterday. I want to make sure everybody can hear the questions.
Okay, I guess just stand up and yell, or...
Right, Paul Nemitz, thank you, Julia. It's a great journalism entrepreneurial initiative. But I would like to ask you, aren't there conditions which the government must create through legislation so that this model works better? For example, this issue of complexity which you describe. If there is good legislation protecting whistleblowers, isn't that helpful for you? Isn't that something to work forward to? Or the issue of the public register for political ads. Of course, you can try with your technology, but if Facebook tweaks a few buttons, it won't work anymore. So isn't there also an issue in your new journalism, and probably generally for journalism, to work and push in this new age of complex technology, legislators, to create the conditions that the fourth estate can still operate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think that journalism can solve any of these issues. All we can do is illuminate them, right? So I felt really proud that after we built our repository of Facebook political ads, I feel like we played a part in shaming Facebook into building their own public repository, which obviously was much more complete than ours. And so I feel like that was a great step. I do think, though, that it would be an even better step if the government actually had its own repository and was looking at the ads, because the government has, in the US, very strong, not very strong, medium strong disclosure rules around political advertising, but because the law was written so long ago, it doesn't envision anything about internet advertising. And so I think our role as journalists, we see ourselves as throwing stuff over the fence and then hoping that the policymakers will take that and do something with it.
Let me follow up on that with a question. You mentioned Ed Snowden. He's been advocating that journalists do more to protect themselves from surveillance and action, but a couple of years ago he started to change that, and thinking that there's really no way journalists can finally protect themselves, and that journalists themselves should be advocating for changing the laws to reduce the amount of surveillance. It's not a markup question, but it's something I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah. I mean, look, I agree with that it's really difficult for journalists to offer any level of assurances about confidentiality these days. I take as many steps as possible. I have fake name accounts. I have encryption of all kinds. And yet, the truth is that we have seen time and time again, the case of Reality Winner is a good example, that so many things can betray a source, that I feel increasingly nervous about offering any assurances to anybody. And I think that Edward Snowden is probably right. Those assurances need to come from the government.
Uh,
Oh, she's got someone.
Am I good? Right. Hey, sorry. When it comes to web scraping and reverse engineering, there's a good chance you may overlap with hacking laws, the CFA. How concerned are you about that, and how are you planning to deal with that?
Oh God, this is my favorite question. So for those of you who don't know, automated data collection at scale, sometimes known as web scraping, can often violate the terms of service of various websites. So a website can write in their little terms of service, which no one ever reads, that you shouldn't collect data automatically from this site, and then we would technically be breaking the law by collecting that information. And unfortunately, in the US, there's a law that makes that a criminal violation, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. That is a legal risk for us. We will be collecting data at scale, and we are, I guess we don't, our plan is to do it judiciously in the public interest for data that is already publicly available, right? We're not gonna go behind a password protected site. We're not gonna, there's certain things that would make it hacking in our mind. Not necessarily in the mind of a judge, because a judge could decide that even the public data on a totally open website is a violation of the law. But I think it's just something that we have to face, and it's something that why we're so grateful for having the funding that we do, because we're hiring a really amazing general counsel, and she's gearing up for the fight.
Where's the mic?
Hi, Chris Chick sent me hi. First off, I want to thank you so much for talking about generating data. I think that this is really, really important. If you look at the world of leaks, you get what's in the company's interest in collecting, but that's not necessarily what the most pressing societal interests are. So I think there's a lot of space for platform development and other things like that. I guess the other thing I wanted to say really quickly was that, if I look at this conference and I see how much is responding to kind of the questions of social media, to me, what's really interesting is if you think about how easy that would have been to change in 2001, 2002, compared to how hard it is to change now, there's no question that it would have been much easier to change if, in fact, the generation of technologists in 2001, 2002 who were early working on those platforms had the kind of values that I think are embodied in this conference. How do you see changing the kind of interest and identity of technologists in such a way that we don't end up having to, years later, as Paul said, regulate or create laws or kind of try to put the cat back in the bag, but rather try to develop technologies that are kind of right-minded in the first place? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a couple. I think what I see among technologists is actually a real hunger to do something public-minded. There's so many people, you see this movement right now in Silicon Valley, right? The tech workers are organizing, they're demanding change. So I feel like that is happening, that there is a real change as people in the industry have realized that their tools could be used in ways they didn't envision and that are harmful, they are actually seeking to change that. And that's spectacular, right? I don't think I've ever heard of any oil company walkouts or, tobacco company like protests from the employees. So it's a really special thing about the technology community, and I hope that it actually reaps some change. And I also have to say, I'm just generally a hopeful person. I think, I remember when I went to college, everyone smoked on airplanes. Do you remember that? Like there was a smoking section in the airplane, as if somehow the smoke wasn't going to fly over to the other section. And so we have, in the world, made pretty dramatic changes in our norms and the way we live. And I feel like we're on the cusp of making some of those changes now. And I want to be on the forefront of highlighting the things that need to be changed.
Will highlighting ever go into advocating?
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I think of it in terms of, first of all, I grew up in this world of completely neutral point of view. It's beaten into my head from the Wall Street Journal, San Francisco Chronicle. You can never have an opinion about anything. But what I love about the scientific method is it frees you up. You don't have to pretend to be objective. You're just testing a hypothesis, and then you're describing the limitations of that hypothesis. And so it allows us to have a different approach. And I think one of our hypotheses could be, well, what would fix this situation, right? We could test that and say, here's a solution that might work. I don't know if we're going to do that. Don't have an exact plan for it, but I want to have an open mind to the idea that the way we could best serve readers is by helping them figure out what they could do about the situation.
Next question.
Hi, you said your default for markup is that everything data should be as public as possible. Do you mean it's going to be open data? Is it going to be on GitHub or some other repository? And will you come to Open Data Camp in the UK and pitch, we need to work together?
Yay, open data. Look, we are, everyone at the Markup is very interested in being as open as possible with our data. And so I don't think we've decided on our repository yet. It might be GitHub, it might be GitLab. We haven't chosen, but there will be a place, and I can't promise that I'll come, but I will. They are in spirit.
Next question. In the back, I think. Well, over here.
Hi, I wanted to know, how do you generate some of the hypotheses? So, as you said, they often change once you apply the scientific method, and it's kind of linked to the question before about we are not biased, but obviously a hypothesis comes from somewhere in your mind or from a source or from something. So also the things that you choose to investigate, as you say, they are the most important questions of our time, but how do you pick some of the stories? If you could maybe give a couple of examples. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. We've talked a lot about how are we going to decide what to investigate, and we've decided that the way we're thinking about it is impact on society. So the questions that have the most resonance for the most people, that have the impact on the most people, are the ones that we want to prioritize the highest. So, for instance, I don't want to talk about specific story ideas, but basically we're working on some things that aren't really what you would normally think of as technology stories. There's a lot of algorithms, like the one I mentioned in criminal risk sentencing, that are used throughout society. So there's algorithms that employers use to sort through resumes to decide who to hire. There's algorithms that landlords use to decide who to let into their apartments. There's algorithms that public welfare agencies use to decide which children to take away from their parents for fear of abuse. Those are the kinds of things that affect a lot of people and have very little oversight. And so we are looking at those as much as we're looking at sort of the Facebook and Google and things like that.
Follow up on that, Mark Andreessen, who helped create the first web browser of note, and now a venture capitalist, famously said a few years ago that software is eating the world. What you just described seems to fit into that category. Is there anything that's not a tech story at this point by that standard?
I mean, yeah, that's a fair question, right? So one of the reasons we chose, you know, the impact of technology on society is because we felt like it was so broad that we could probably justify almost anything, given the fact that software is eating the world. And you know, I would sort of, I think about Mark's quote all the time, but I would say that, like, very specifically, software, and particularly automated decision making, is used often as political cover for decisions that people don't want to have to take credit for making themselves. And so it's actually a very good proxy for things that need to be looked into, right? Because as soon as somebody says to you, oh, I can't do anything about it, the computer says blah, you know you're getting screwed, right? Like, that's the beginning of this getting screwed conversation. And you also know that somebody made a decision to screw you, and those are the kind of decisions we want to investigate.
Will you look at journalism itself? We've talked a little bit before about the notion that technology journalism is not the greatest thing in the world. I'd love to see what you do help improve it. Is there anything on the table there?
I think my goal with the Markup is to build kind of a model so that other journalists could emulate it. I think about 538. So 538 set up a newsroom, and really they brought, I would say, statistical literacy to journalism, right? They said, you know what, like, there's a better way to analyze polls. It's better to do a meta-analysis than just to do an analysis of each poll as it comes out. And then they brought statistical literacy to all sorts of investigations. They didn't do a lot of original data collection. But what happened was they were copied. Lots of newsrooms added little units like that did that kind of thing. And I see that as a win. And I would see it as a win if the Markup became a model for kind of the way we do tech accountability journalism, and other people copied it. And people from the Markup went on to lead those units. And so I see that as our role, as like showing people how it should be done and hopefully spreading that knowledge through the industry.
Can you show how it can be done by local journalists who have almost no resources? Is that that's a huge gap in journalism right now?
Yep. I mean, I think our strategy with local is going to be the same as foreign, which is partnerships, right?
Okay.
I mean, we have this tech firepower that they don't have, and so we can partner with local organizations. I mean, we just hired our data science editor. He brought his homemade computer to the office because he needed more power than any computers out there. And it's like this tall, and it has, like, when it's on, there's like LED lights that flash and things whir. It's like so exciting. And I feel like we can bring that to other people. They can bring us stories that they need help with, and we have the ability to help.
Sounds like a gamer's computer, not... Other questions? Where's the mic back there?
Last question.
Last question.
Hi, I'm Marissa with iBeam. I had a question about the visualization approach that you'll be taking with a lot of this data. I'm just curious what you guys are thinking in terms of illuminating so much of the information that you'll be gathering.
Yeah. So we're going to have a graphics desk that will help us visualize our work. One thing that is a little bit of a pet peeve for me is that most data desks, as I described in most newsrooms, are service desks, and actually they're tasked with not only analyzing but sometimes often visualizing the data. And I think those are two separate tasks. And so our data journalists are really collecting and analyzing data. They are not responsible for visualizing it. There will be visual experts who will do the visualizations. And if they want to do some visualization, that's fine. But to me, the most important thing for a journalist when they're closing a story is to be focused on accuracy. I want them to be sitting there, spot checking their data, making sure it's factual, and not thinking about the color palette.
Actually, one more question. When are you going to launch?
Hopefully this summer.
Okay. That sounds like a tech deadline. Okay, let's thank Julia Angwin for a great talk.